Hey guys, welcome to the channel. As you see in the thumbnail, what if Deku got harem with Grimwood girls? Before I start, please do support for more awesome content, and subscribe my channel and like this video. Go support and follow the Sunny Solana for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story. Link in the description. Deku Ishida, principal of Aldera Middle School, growled as he stared at the bold headline of the newspaper laid upon his desk in his sterile and cramped office, angrily tapping his finger on the metal of his desk as his murky green eyes skimmed the words over and over. He could scarcely believe anyone would truly be wasting their time with this. Aldera Middle School to be investigated for quirk and quirkless discrimination. Investigated, as if they were some kind of criminals. The insinuation boiled his blood when all he or his staff had ever done was keep their students in line. He wasn't to blame if some had to be given more harsh lessons than others to make it stick. Yet the media apparently disagreed. Principal Ishida of Aldera Middle School, as well as many of the staff of the local institute, could be facing anywhere between 2 to 30 years, if not more, depending on just how severe any proven allegations turn out to be. The rumors are, however, quite troubling. Insinuations of teachers teaching quirk superiority, favoring those with more powerful quirks and belittling or ignoring those with weaker quirks, as well as willfully ignoring the plights of weaker students in the favor of stronger ones. But most concerning of all, our anonymous tip has suggested the treatment of its quirkless students is on par with psychological torture, implying the exclusion and treatment of such students to be so bad it could have a severe lasting effect on the psyche. Though we are unable to share intimate details at the present time due to the ongoing investigation. He grinded his teeth together as he turned away and back to his computer with a glare, going over the project he was personally being forced to oversee. The transfer of his entire school to 3 alternative schools due to Aldera being labeled a potentially hazardous environment until the investigation had concluded. Sakaka Middle School, a chaotic den equally known as one of the less effective schools in Japan due to its rowdy female population having a reputation for delinquency. Nebo Middle School, a fairly generic school in the very center of Muzutafa City that had never had a known incident so far in the past decade it had been open. And finally, there was the one school Ishida personally approved of most, Masakuren Middle and High School, an all-male school with a reputation for its uniform nature, disapproving of students who didn't perfectly represent the uniform image. That it so happened to be heavily anti-mutant was just a coincidence as far as Ishida was concerned. A far cry from the 4th school he was ignoring, not keen on sending any student to it. That was at least, until he reached his profile. A familiar freckled face with green eyes and fluffy hair stared at Ishida, and he felt an immediate dislike boil up inside. Izuku Midoriya, the quirkless weirdo who was more trouble than he was worth, always trying to get the school's star pupil Bakugo into trouble. If it wasn't for the fact that it would have dragged up far too many issues, Ishida would have discarded him already. But as he'd never been caught in a fight but only the aftermath, the worst he could do was punish him with detention and move on typically. A small part of him wanted to punch the boy. He was sure if anyone had a motive to give that anonymous tip, it would be him. But then, in an instant, that rage suddenly boiled away as his eyes roamed over the 4th school again that sat completely untouched so far. He paused, before a cruel smirk came to mind. Oh, this might actually be perfect. Try to ruin my school, will you? Then let's see how you feel when I ruin your education forever. He pulled up a copy of the file and began making changes with his admin status, grinning as he watched it come together. When he finished up, he leaned back in his chair, taking in his work for a moment before smirking to himself as he ran a hand through his short brown hair. There, if you want it out of school so badly, then soon you will be Izumi. Once they throw you out, you'll have no place to come back to fix it, and you'll be out of the school system for good if all goes well. With that satisfied thought, he dropped the file into a tab labeled Nishi and moved on, feeling deeply satisfied, completely unaware of the reality of the situation he was giving to his student, content with thinking he would have ended the boy's school life for good. Izuku Midoriya was quaking as he stared at the gate of the school he'd arrived at moments ago, his mouth dry and his eyes wide. Surely he'd come to the wrong address? He quickly pulled out the card he'd been given to know where his new school that he'd be attending now that Aldera was temporarily shut down would be. Reading the address again, he looked up at the street sign and gulped. They matched. This can't be right. He thought confused and worriedly as he looked around, hesitant to keep moving, trying to ignore the weird looks he was getting from many students walking past him into their school. Going past the gate. It was iron wrought, and had a chain-link fence on a small stone wall spanning around the actually rather massive grounds of the building. On either side of the large double gate were two almost guard tower-like buildings. Above the one on the left, which had a window, was a sign that read reception. With a gulp, he supposed he had no other course of action to take other than approach it, his legs shaking slightly as he did so, as he thought how to explain this without sounding like it was some kind of ploy. Why would it be like one? Well, the answer was staring him right in the face as he reached the window and saw etched into the little windowsill the name of the school. Nishi Algul's School. The name of a school that many knew of, but little to nothing of the inner workings of, but everyone knew two facts about. It was a school that was exclusive to mutants, and specifically female mutants. In other words, something he was most certainly not. With a hesitant hand he pressed down on the bell and waited patiently. A moment later, suddenly a flash of green appeared in his vision, and he nearly yelped when he saw a 7-foot-tall anthropomorphic praying mantis before him, with eyes that were entirely pure wine red as she rested her massive pincers on the sill. She had a curvy and busty figure which was barely being hidden by her white wool turtleneck and black pencil skirt. She looked down at him, and her eyes expanded slightly as she let out a surprised chitter. "Oh, hello there. Is something wrong? Why yeah, I think there's been some kind of mistake," he explains with nervousness and tension. Adults rarely liked it when he told them someone had messed up. She blinked at him and he pulled out the card, putting it on the table. "I'm F from Aldera and was meant to be transferring schools because of the investigation that's going on. But they must have given me the wrong address?" The mantis woman let out a low chitter of confusion, taking it in the center of her arms as pincers had no way of grasping normally. Izuku's eyes briefly lit up with intrigue at this, but his worry over his schooling trumped his desire to question her about her quirk. "Weird," she muttered before turning to the computer she had in her booth and typing on it, looking at something Izuku couldn't see. "Name, please?" "Izuku Midoriya," he offered, and the woman paused, before frowning. Noticing, Izuku tilted his head. "Is something wrong? I'm not sure. We were meant to have a student transferring in, but..." She looked up, with a calculating look settled on her features. "Do you have a sister?" No ma'am?" Izuku furrowed his brow confused and she clicked her tongue, before turning to a phone nearby. "In that case, something really is off. Give me a moment," she told him as she put in a number, and Izuku nodded, tapping his hand against his leg nervously as he watched the other students entering the school. In a way it was fascinating to see, almost not a single one of them were close to the typical visage of humans, as he saw a skeleton girl, 2 yellow-skinned girls with striking resemblance, and even seemingly a zombie entering the school. "Hello? Headmistress?" The sweet voice of the praying mantis pulled Izuku's attention back, and he saw her sitting down as she held the white curly-corded phone to her head. "Yes, it's Yutuki, ma'am. Yes, if you'll just turn on your camera feed for the front gate. It seems Aldera's transfer is going to have unexpected complications." "Yes, he is. His name is Izuku Midoriya." "Are you certain?" "All right." She pulled the phone away and turned to Izuku. "Please go stand by the gate. I'll be with you in a moment." Blinking in confusion, he did as he was told and walked to the gate while clutching his bag straps, coming to a stop inside, before being joined by Yutuki a moment later, as she gestured for him to follow with her pincer, which she held out in front of her as they made their way to the main building. Izuku couldn't help but feel just a tiny surge of excitement at the prospect of getting to see the inside of the mysterious school, something that rarely happened to anyone who wasn't a student or staff member. It did admittedly have a bit of an eerie vibe on the outside, as even with the sun out it seemed to be in perpetual shade from the nearby forest, and its dark purple brickwork soaked up the light, leaving it with a ghostly sort of glow amidst the tall fresh grass. All in all, rather appropriate for a ghoul school, really. They reached the front doors, which were jutting out slightly with the wall, a small set of stone steps leading up to them. Yutuki opened them up and he followed inside to what were certainly darker halls than he was used to at Aldera, yet at the same time somehow more comfortable. Almost homey. Maybe it had to do with the somewhat thematic lighting on the walls that, though LED, were emulating torches. They walked past the set of lockers and headed directly to the left, walking past a few classrooms before they came up to a fancy ornate door on their left. Yutuki reached up and knocked with a pincer, and after a moment, the door swung open and Izuku's jaw dropped as a woman with pale skin and a long white sundress that had full sleeves yet an open neckline walked out, short slightly curled hair falling to above her shoulders as she stood up after exiting, stood up to a full 9 feet, eclipsing even Yutuki in height. Holy crud, she's pretty dash. She smiled a soft smile, bordering on a smirk, as she lidded her eyes slightly and a silky voice escaped her dark red lipstick-adorned lips. Ah, hello Yutuki, and hello there young man, so you're from Aldera, are you? Izuku gulped and quickly nodded, trying to not let his blush show as he did his best to maintain his politeness, not wanting his brief moment of hormonal weakness to be picked up on by apparently the school's headmistress of all people. The last thing he needed was to be thought of as a pervert by her right now. Why yes ma'am, Izuku Midoriya. Well Midoriya, it does appear there has been something of a mix-up. She sighs, before smiling at him kindly and raising a hand to gesture for him to come in with a finger, which is when Izuku saw her 8-inch claws she had on either hand. Holy crap, that's so dang cool. Why don't you come inside, sweetie? We'll have you sorted out in no time and make sure you don't get in trouble. He nodded, wondering if she always spoke in such a, frankly alluring tone, walking inside while Yutuki nodded to him and turned to walk off. As she did, he quickly turned to her. Thank you for helping, Miss Yutuki. She blinked, but then smiled. No problem, I hope you get your issue sorted out. With that she took off and Izuku turned back, sighing before walking into the office of the headmistress of Nishi. It was actually rather fancy, with wooden seats that had cushions embedded inside on one side of a mahogany desk and a much larger chair, closer to a throne yet otherwise the same in design on the other side that she sat down on, while he took one of the regular chairs. So Midoriya, she began, meeting his eyes with a disarming smile. I'm the headmistress, that's almost call me, but if you need a name, Headmistress Dimitrescu should suffice, I believe. Oh, well, it's nice to meet you, headmistress, he said, nodding his head to her respectfully, making her expression shift for just a second to surprise before she smiled and nodded. Now, as you've noticed, it seems there's been a mix-up, so on my screen here I've got the name of the student we're supposed to get. The tall pale woman told him, reading it out loud. Izumi Midoriya, quirk, cat, first-year middle school student. Not a model student by any means according to the notes, but then again, I've never found other schools to be as good at dealing with troubled students as they should be, so I've never been one to take stock in the notes. Do you know any girl at all that fits that description? Izuku stared, before shaking his head. And no ma'am, none. I don't think there was another Midoriya at Aldera? That elicited a deep frown from the headmistress, who leaned closer to the computer for a moment with a furrowed brow before pulling back. Well, certainly it seems they bear a resemblance to you. She hesitated for a moment before turning to him. If I might ask, what is your quirk? I'll need to call the other schools and having that information will help. Izuku froze, then looked down sadly, preparing for all the general hospitality so far to evaporate. I'm quirkless, miss. A silence louder than a gunshot settled over the room, and Izuku hesitantly looked up expecting to find a look of disgust. He did find one, but it wasn't aimed at him but the computer. I see, she said slowly, a suspicious tone beginning to creep into her voice as she grabbed her phone. I suppose I shall try Sakaku first. The next 10 minutes, it felt, were very tense for Izuku as he watched Dimitrescu call school after school, and seemingly have the same interaction each time, asking if they had any missing transfer students, and would prove to be right, as even when the headmistress insisted they check their records, not a single one could find an Izuku Midoriya on their systems. Still, the headmistress didn't give up easy, even when she seemed very uncomfortable with calling Masakura. She pressed on, and went through the call only to get nothing. All the while, her features were steadily growing both more concerned and perhaps even angry. She finally put the phone down once more and turned to him, sighing. He flinched, expecting her to tell him there was nothing to be done, and he just have to stop wasting her time now, immediately expecting the worst. Instead, well, I suppose I'll have to turn to the board now. Someone must have some way of getting you back into classes, she said, and he perked up in surprise. The board? He asked, and she gave him a curious look, raising a brow. Yes, the board. I'm hardly going to let you end up in trouble just because things are a little more complicated than expected, she said as she began dialing another number, stunning him slightly at how genuine it was. It didn't sound like she wanted him gone, she was just trying to help. Why was that so shocking? Teachers helping shouldn't be so weird to him, he registered vaguely. Hello? She asked when the phone connected before humming. Yes, hi, this is the headmistress of Nishi Algul School. Yes, I have a transfer from Aldera here, but there seems to have been a mix-up. As you know, we're a school for girl mutants, and yet the student we've received is a male with no mutations. Yes, it is confusing, and I've contacted the other schools, so there seems to be an issue here. I was wondering if you could help me move him into an appropriate school. Yes? Excellent. Izuku sighed in relief as he looked up. It sounded like things would be sorted soon. He began to smile. His quirk? He's quirkless, hello? She blinked, before pulling the phone away and glaring at it harshly. He hung up. How rude! Izuku's smile dropped immediately as he sighed a sadder sigh this time and looked down again. I'm not surprised. Well, I still certainly don't approve. I'll be certain that such blatant discrimination like that won't go unpunished, she said with narrowed eyes as she more harshly punched in a new number. I'll just have to go higher up the board. But it ended the same, so she called someone yet higher. It wasn't until finally she called the last number she could, and even that ended with her being hung up on, that she put the phone down, a quiet fire blazing in her eyes as she sighed. I hate the education board so much sometimes. Not even Ibutsu had such trouble when we were getting her settled in. I'm sorry, Midoriya. If I can't even get to the head of the education board, then I think I simply won't be able to get you into another school. Izuku deflated, putting his head down as he tried not to panic, stiffening yet doing his best to not let the warring emotions of anger at Aldera, knowing this was most likely purposeful, and fear of what might be next spill out. He didn't mean to let it slip out, but it did. Probably what they wanted. Excuse me? Dimitrescu blinked as she turned full to him. What, who wanted? Izuku froze, before looking down and scuffing his foot. Aldera, since I'm quirkless, and so the rumors are likely true then. The headmistress narrowed her eyes, a certain fire exploding in them before she took a deep breath, then smiled her softest smile. In that case, could you look at me, Midoriya? He blinked, then did so and watched as she began typing on the computer, changing the file. He watched the name Izumi change to Izuku, watched the quirk be changed to none, and watched as his entire record was suddenly scrubbed. The only thing that remained false was the picture, as she turned to him and her smile grew wider. Her next words had his eyes going wide as his entire world was rocked, as of all the things he may have expected, never in a million years would it be for her to say, "Congratulations, young man. As headmistress, I welcome you as the first male student at Nishigul's school. I hope you'll enjoy your time here." Congratulations, young man. As headmistress, I welcome you as the first male student at Nishigul's school. I hope you'll enjoy your time here. The words repeated in Izuku's mind for several moments as his jaw dropped, eyes slowly going comically wide as he tried to process the unexpected response. Welcome to WW what? The headmistress chortled, covering her mouth with a palm, a small glint of amusement shimmering in her eyes. Well, I can hardly kick you out now, can I? No, I refuse to allow the actions of discriminatory people to ruin a child's education, no matter what lengths I have to go to fix this issue. She put down her hand and gave him a more serious look, though she still wore a small smile. Still, this is unorthodox, so Midoriya, if you are okay with this solution, I will have some very important rules for you to follow. Izuku blinked, mind still reeling, and actions delayed before he quickly bowed forward. Thank you, Headmistress Dimitrescu. I'll do whatever you need me to, I promise. I won't disappoint you. Oh my, someone is eager, she said a tad teasingly, before humming and sitting up straighter as a serious look settled in her gaze. But now, in all seriousness, the rules. I am not accusing you of anything, young man, understand that, but I also do not know that much about you right now. A boy soon to enter puberty within the throes of the dense female population. Well, I do have to be careful. Izuku took several moments to register what she was saying, and he went bright red after a moment, starting to sputter flail. I promise nothing W will happen. T the girls P probably won't even G get near me anyways. Dimitrescu's smile faltered at that, and she looked down at her desk with a quiet sigh, cursing Aldera. That might have been a worse response than if he'd shown any perverted tendencies just for the sad realization of how his last school had left him feeling. I am not so confident. My girls are very friendly, Dimitrescu assured quieter, before shaking her head and perking up again. She had to exude confidence and kindness as much as possible to keep her students reassured after all. Either way, I do have to adhere to my role as headmistress, and that means at the very least for formality's sake rules must be put in place. The first, and most obvious, is that no discrimination shall take place inside these halls. Nishi is practically sacred to some for its refusal of discrimination against mutations, and every girl within these halls deserves to live without that worry. Why yes, Headmistress Dimitrescu. Izuku nodded rapidly, seemingly slightly more relaxed. I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if I ever made anyone think like that, even accidentally. The pale vampiress softened a little as she met his gaze. And Midoriya. That goes both ways. Izuku blinked slowly at her, before tilting his head and furrowing his brow, seemingly confused. It was actually rather dog-like, and the raven-haired headmistress had to push down another giggle bubbling up in her chest, before continuing. You are stuck here due to discrimination, and I am allowing you to stay to no longer be faced with such matters. You may not be a Nishi girl, but while you are here you will be treated like any other student. Her gaze hardened a little. Which means you are just as entitled to safety and happiness within these walls. To discriminate against anyone is against our policy. If any of the girls do, please, know you are equally allowed to report them and I will take it seriously. Izuku's eyes widened somewhat as he went a bit more stiff, but then he looked away and began chewing quietly on his lip. Dimitrescu silently sighed. Transfers never do believe us at first. The second rule, for the sake of the girls since we lack male bathrooms for obvious reasons, is that you will be using the disability bathrooms when changing for physical education. Following on from this, Rule 3, I will not tolerate any unwanted attention being put on my girls. She looks up with a very stern look. If you are caught in any perverse situations with my girls, I will have to take back my offer immediately. Do you understand? She asked, and he nodded rapidly. I do. I swear I won't do anything to upset you. He gulped, bowing deeply again. She smiled in relief, fully believing him. Thank you, I trust your word, but I still had to be sure you understood, she said, as she stood up again and came around the desk. Now come, I'll bring you to class. My only other rule is much more open. Izuku blinked, quickly climbing out of his chair and following her as she opened the door wide. He walked outside but kept his eye on her, stepping into the atmospheric halls again. Open? Indeed, young man. She nodded as she closed the door and gestured for him to follow, which he did. They walked back to the locker area, and went into a hallway directly ahead of the front doors. The exact timings I will leave up to you, since I'm sure there will be less things to report at some times than others, but I would appreciate it if we were to keep it to a weekly schedule. I would like for you to report to my office so I can make sure you're acclimating well. You want to make sure I'm settling in well? Izuku asked with uncertainty. The woman smiled and nodded as they turned to the left again and began walking around a long winding corridor that seemed to be leading them in a circular pattern. Indeed. The tall vampiress nodded with a slight smile. I'd like to be certain your time here is good and safe, and I can hardly do that from a distance now. Izuku blinked, face slightly heated, and he felt an odd fluttering in his stomach and chest. Was this what it felt like to have people other than his mom who cared? He refused to get his hopes up, but a part of him couldn't help thinking Dimitrescu was definitely in the top 10 best people Izuku knew. Pretty much at all. Alright, miss, I guess weekly works, he said with a nod of his head, and her smile pulled up just a little higher as they kept walking. Eventually, after what Izuku internally estimated to be about the 3/4 mark, they suddenly came up on a wall with a door. Here we are, Class A20, Dimitrescu announced, making Izuku blink as he came up to a stop beside her. At his curious look, she further elaborated with a chuckle. Due to Nishi being a sort of mutant sanctuary, instead of focusing on just one school year, we teach all the way from elementary to college for those interested, though the college building and some of the hero course areas are separate from the main building. Izuku's head whipped to her. Hero course? She giggled and smirked a little at his predictable reaction, showing her teeth including her sharp fangs. Indeed, our curriculum at Nishi is extensive. As for the classes, they're formatted by groupings of A, B, and C. These groupings decide the dormitories for anyone staying on Nishi grounds. After that is the level which the class is at, which starts at number 3 for elementary, then counts down to 0 for college. As for the final number, it's just general class numbers that help decide who get paired for assemblies and such, at least at your middle school level. Oh, so. Middle school is 2 then? That's why it's A20? He asked, curious, and she nodded her head with a hum, knocking on the door a second later and turning to face it. Yes, I figured it would be best to tell you before I let you go so you understand the classes better, she explained, and before Izuku could react, the solid brown wood door, which had a small window in it with metal bars, opened up to reveal a teacher a little shorter than himself. She definitely fit in at Nishi, even more so than Dimitrescu, that was for certain. With ice blue skin and mismatched purple and red eyes, she would be a striking presence, and yet somehow those were arguably the least memorable of her features. She had long blue hair cascading down to the small of her back, a small segment in the middle of her head dyed pink, and black demon-like horns. She also wore a headband with 3 purple roses just in front of said horns. Finally, her hands were made of some kind of deep purple, nearly black chitin with lighter purple spots over it that lead out to sharp thick claws much like a dog's but on a far larger scale. Oh, Miss Dimitrescu! A high-pitched register escaped her, and she smiled, revealing extremely sharp teeth like those of an anglerfish. What do we owe the pleasure, headmistress? Have you brought the news stew? Her eyes trailed down to Izuku and she froze, before blinking twice slowly. Oh, hello? Dimitrescu smiled and gestured for her to close the door. When she did so, the headmistress put a hand on Izuku's shoulder and squeezed gently. Gappei, this is Izuku Midoriya. As it turns out, there was a bit of an issue. Izuku, this is Miss Aya, teacher of Class A20. And nice to meet you, Mississippi. Izuku nodded, holding his hand out to her. She blinked again, seemingly taken aback before the polite greeting, before chuckling good-naturedly and shaking her head. Well, it's nice to meet you too, Midoriya, but perhaps shaking my hand isn't the best idea. She snorted, flexing her claws, and Izuku blushed. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize. Her smile widened a little higher at that. At least that meant he definitely wasn't going to hold her appearance against her. That's all right, Midoriya. So, I thought I was supposed to have an Izumi Midoriya? Dimitrescu sighed as she nodded. Yes, well. There were issues as I mentioned, and so, Dimitrescu began to explain, and Izuku watched. Watched as Aya shifted through confusion, to rage, to sadness, and finally understanding. It felt like when she finally looked back down to him, she was seeing a new person all over again, as she smiled gently. I see. In that case, hello Mr. Midoriya. I suppose I'm your new teacher for the year. I can't wait to get to know you, she said with such a genuine kindness in her tone it made Izuku quake a little with hopefulness. Let's get you introduced then, shall we? I'll go warn everyone a new student is coming in. Excellent. Dimitrescu chuckled as Miss Aya headed back inside, turning to Izuku and kneeling down to be eye level. Well then, this is where I'll have to leave you for now, but you know where my office is, yes? Why yes, ma'am. Izuku nodded and she smiled wider, squeezing his shoulder. Then just come find me if you require my assistance, dear. Otherwise, I shall see you at the end of the day, and then again at the end of the week, she told him, and with that she rose again, walking off the way she came, leaving Izuku alone in the hall. After several moments that Izuku spent quietly fidgeting and scuffing his shoes against the ground, Aya's voice finally came again calling him in, and he took a deep breath. Well, here goes nothing. With that thought, he walked inside the classroom to meet his new class for the year, Class A20. When he stepped inside, even he felt how the world seemed to slow. Instead of the noise dropping as instantly as the realization clearly did, The noise declined rapidly yet still far from instantly until the whole room was silent, leaving Izuku blushing very hard as he turned to take them all in. Pretty much every single girl's jaw was dropped. Heck, one girl with graying slightly greenish skin and several stitching patterns around her body had her jaw literally fall off, and Miss Aya was clearly at least a little amused as she tried to hide some giggling. Hello, class, this is Izuku Midoriya. It turns out there was a bit of a mix-up with Aldera's transfers and someone changed things they shouldn't have, and well, long story short, Izumi Midoriya doesn't exist. Aya quickly explained, and several brows furrowed in confusion, and holy crap, was that a centaur in the third row, and a slime girl not far from her. So cool. None of this was Midoriya's fault, but well. Izuku, perhaps you should introduce yourself and your quirk, or... Izuku froze, his throat drying. Here it comes, the part where everyone learns to hate him. It didn't matter that he'd been told multiple times they couldn't. What he was told didn't always match up with what happened, but there was no avoiding it. Instinctively his eyes snapped shut. Time for the hate to begin. I am Quirkless. The room was silent for several moments, then instead of protests or disgust as he expected, cracking one eye open warily only to be met with softening and understanding expressions. Oh, that's really cool. I've never met a quirkless person before. Squeak. A girl muttered quietly near the back of the room, drawing Izuku's eye, and Jesus Christ, that was a tall fox. That had to be 13 feet, minimum. Wait. What did she say? Now, I'm sure you're all curious for more, but we can get into that at a later date. We're in the midst of class after all. Miss Aya reminded them, before pointing to the sole empty desk in the room beside a purple-skinned and purple-haired girl in a deep purple robe in the third row who was watching him with curiosity but also a soft gaze. You take the seat beside Sabella, please, Midoriya. We're just going over basic English literacy today. He nodded quietly and made his way to the seat, aware of all eyes on him as he passed by a girl with a triceratops head and yellow scaly body, reaching the seat and sitting down. With a clear of the throat, all eyes turned to Miss Aya, though clearly many were still sneaking occasional glances his way. He began unpacking his bag and taking out his necessary supplies as the teacher announced she just needed to grab some papers first, and as he did he felt something get closer to him, causing him to look and see the previously mentioned purple girl leaning closer to him. Then she spoke, in a tone rather reminiscent of the headmistress's own, yet with even more of a seductress quality to his surprise. Welcome to class, new boy. I have to say I'm surprised, but then again I'm sure you can guess we all are. Why yeah, I can imagine. He whispered back quietly, and she smiled a little, flashing a bit of teeth and a sharp fang at him. Whoa, is that part of her quirk? Hang on, did I just meet 2 vampires in one day? What are the odds? If you don't mind me batting in, why? She asked, nothing but genuine curiosity reflected in her tone. Izuku sighed, and explained it as succinctly as he could. Be because Aldera's principal wanted rid of me and thought this would work as a plan. That sucks. The purple-skinned girl sighed and Izuku nodded, frowning. He thought that would be the end of it, but then she gave him another smile. Sabella Komori. Nice to meet my new seatmate. And nice to meet you too, Komori. I'm Izuku M. Midoriya, like the teacher said. He blushed, and she took him off guard completely when she suddenly winked at him, her smile turning to a smirk. Oh, just Sabella is fine. Pup Komori was my dad and we do not speak much anymore, she told him before turning to her work. Izuku sputtered quietly, his face growing even redder. Miss Aya seemed to notice but just rolled her eyes, muttering something about Grimwood under her breath, if Izuku heard right. Izuku just stared back at his own desk, a little stunned. That was... She was nice. She was nice to him. That was weird, but felt so good. Izuku quietly gulped, as he began writing. Maybe if she was his seatmate then he really could enjoy his time once he adjusted. He ended up putting whether she was nice or not to the test a lot sooner than anticipated when the bell rang to signify the end of the period and they were told to go to one of the computer rooms for their next period, which was to be computer sciences. Realizing that he had no idea how said rooms were labeled, Izuku found himself cautiously approaching the purple-skinned girl after he packed up. You Keiko, Sabella? HM? Oh yes, Midoriya, is something the matter? she asked with a slight yet kind smile, and he nodded. Why I don't know where any of the rooms in the school are so. She chuckled and smiled, jerking her head. Then follow me, I'll guide you today. You can flutter all about the school later to figure it out when you have time. With a sigh of relief he nodded and fell in line with her as they wandered out, heading to their next class together, Izuku jittering nervously and Sabella wearing a smile on her face while occasionally looking back at him. Every time she did, she'd give him a soft, encouraging smile if she saw him looking nervous. Definitely a good seatmate to have. Computer science had been a fairly basic affair, going over basic IT skills once more as a brush up on their skills, and had then gone to a period on religious education which was apparently teaching about Muslim beliefs at this point in the curriculum. Sabella had noticed that despite his nerves, Izuku was clearly quite the attentive student, writing notes almost quicker than she could see his hand moving. While she took notes at a slower pace, she still kept them rather detailed, and as a fellow high-scoring student, she had to say she approved of his work ethic. Here she was hoping it would pay off for him. After that, the bell rang for lunch and Sabella led Izuku to the food court that was outside the school that linked up to the dormitory buildings for ease of access. To those staying long-term at Nishi, Izuku had been amazed when they'd walked into the more green-tinted building and looked around as Sabella had seen while she wandered off to find her friends, figuring he'd like to be alone while ordering. He did his best to be polite thankfully, never truly staring at anyone beyond occasionally doing a small double take, and no one was going to truly blame him for that. Sabella still always needed a second glance whenever she saw Class B10's 100-foot-tall giantess. Whenever she looked out the window, she found her 4 best friends, quickly ordering their food together and sitting down. So Sibs, the new guy. A tan-furred girl with large orange hair put up in a mix between a bun and a ponytail grinned on the opposite side of the table from Sabella, turning to the purple vampire. She was wearing a plaid shirt she hadn't buttoned up with a small black sports bra beneath, and blue pants. You're his seatmate, learn anything else about him yet? Oh yeah. Another girl giggled in a high-pitched, shrill voice as she floated upside down beside Sabella, sipping away at her drink. She had an ethereal, seemingly intangible body bathed in a blue glow, and nothing but a simple blue dress adorning her form. Her hair was swept to one side, and had a large electric blue highlight running through them. Sabella, tell us. I can't say there's much to say, I haven't had a chance to sink my teeth in yet. She chuckled, and both girls, along with a smaller girl wrapped head to toe in bandages like a mummy with only some blackened skin poking out at her eyes and in patches down her arm, and a tall stitched-up girl with green hair and large, black and white hair like Frankenstein, groaned. What? The vampire puns are getting old, Sabella. The latter girl, who was seated beside Winnie, groaned in a deeper and somewhat huskier voice than any of the other girls. She was wearing a smart old-school brown tunic and long blue pants which looked more like long shorts on her due to her height, being a good 7 feet tall. Even with the smarts part of my quirk, I don't think I could think of any new ways for you to rehash those puns anymore. The purple vampiress huffed, rolling her eyes at her friends. She wasn't that bad, honestly. With that settled, the topic shifted to what they might do later that week and they went back to eating. Halfway through their feasting, however, Sabella had looked up and paused, before a frown settled on her purple features. Halfway across the room Izuku was sitting at a table with his food, alone. Not a single soul beside him. He was looking around, idly picking at the food with his fork but not truly eating, not meeting any eyes of the room, many of whom were unashamedly staring at him. Sabella realized. He looked confused. He looked worried. But worst of all, the one that made Sabella's frown deepen, was that he looked sad. Sad and alone. So he hadn't made any friends yet, that was definitely confirmed. Had he interacted with anyone in class that she could perhaps help him foster a friendship between? She went through the list of people she saw him interact with, before pausing as she got to the end of the rather short list. Aside from the teachers, it was just her he had talked with. Her eyes drifted down to her plate, clicking her tongue. A minute later, her decision was made as she put on a smile and looked up to her friends. Girls, don't you think it would be a fantastic idea to swap tables? She asked with a purr, gaining blinks of confusion and tilted heads from the other 4. What for? The pale blue ghostly girl beside her giggled confusedly as she bobbed up and down in midair beside them. Sibella simply hummed before turning and nodding to Izuku across the room. Because I think my other friend could really use some company right now. All four girls turned to see who she meant before pausing, then turning back, and Sibella was treated to quite the mix of reactions. That wasn't to say there was any dislike or disdain, far from it. The orange-haired girl had started picking up her food all onto a tray suspiciously fast, as if she had been waiting for an excuse. Meanwhile, the ghostly girl to the left of Sibella let out a comically loud gasp as she fully flipped around, slapping her hands to her face. Oh no, he's alone! We have to change that right now, come on girls. Sibella did crack a small smile at that. Trust Phantasma to immediately want to remedy any social problem. In fact, the only objection came from the smallest girl of the group with the mummy wrappings around her body. Yeah? The new boy. Oh, I don't know, Sibby. What if we say the wrong thing and he thinks we're making fun of him? Or I accidentally make myself look silly and make him distrust the rest of us, or… Tanis, breathe, sweetheart. Breathe. Sibella quickly instructed kindly as she set a hand on her shoulder and squeezed. The girl gulped but did as she was told and took a deep breath to get herself under control as her darkened skin gained some color underneath her bandages. We're just going to say hi, and make sure he's okay. He can't be mad at us for that, right? All right. She nodded after a moment, taking a deep breath. Sibella hummed and turned to the last girl, with the Stitches, who just shrugged with a small smile. I'm not against it. And with those simple words, it was decided as they all nodded, before picking up their own food and hurrying to follow the two who had already shot ahead. When they arrived, Izuku looked up and stiffened for a moment before they sat down with kind smiles, making him relax but also blink in noticeable confusion. Sibella put her own food tray down right beside Izuku, sitting beside him with a wide smile. Hello, Midoriya. I hope you're okay with us joining you? You looked lonely. Oh, that's sure? It's your school. Izuku quickly sputtered out, and all five giggled a little at that. Oh, hardly. The school is Miss Dimitrescu's. Sibella giggled, hiding it behind her hand. The tan-furred girl snorted. Well, technically, before she could finish, Sibella quickly flicked a pea at her suddenly with her spoon, making her yelp. Hush, Winnie, no need to spread rumors, she said before turning to Izuku with amusement twinkling in her shining emerald eyes. Izuku, this is Winnie Okami, one of my best friends. As you can probably guess, her quirk makes her a full-time werewolf. Izuku had a moment of understanding for a second as his eyes darted to the cutlery, and Sibella internally snickered. Yes, that is why the cutlery is all plastic. Oh, and nice to meet you, Izuku said, quickly putting out his hand and making the girl quickly perk up then smirk as she took it and shook it. Ah, manners. Not sure how long those will last between me and Taz. She snickered, making the ghostly girl giggle as well. Winnie. Sibella spoke warningly, only for the wolfish girl to ignore her, gesturing to the pale ghost at her side. I'm Phantasma Tamashi, and I'm a ghost. But everyone just calls me Fan or Taz. It's my nickname, she giggled excitedly, flipping around sideways as she did so and beaming a pearly white smile at him, before patting the bandage-wrapped girl beneath her. And this little shy cutie of a mummy is Tanis Hotai. Don't let her scary stuttering and hiding worry you, she's totally harmless. Taz. The girl whined before nodding at him while hunched in on herself slightly. Hi. Hey. Izuku exchanged back, equally awkwardly making Phantasma coo and mutter something about them matching, and that made Sibella face palm. Hello? I'm Elsa Boken. The last girl introduced, holding out her hand and shaking Izuku's. She had a calming kind of presence, absolutely unaffected by the mad quarter surrounding her. Don't worry, they're always this bad. Elsa, she chuckled, ignoring Phantasma's sputtered protests as she leaned back in her chair, putting one hand in her pocket lazily. I'm the only sane one, barely. Winnie snorted, making Elsa roll her eyes. Aside from that, only other thing I can think to say right now is if you hear anyone talking about a Frankenstein, that's me. She gestured over herself. You know, cause of the obvious quirk. Alright. Well, it's really nice to meet you all, especially if you're as nice as Sibella, he said quickly, before seeming to realize what he said and going red. Elsa chuckled quietly and Tanis let out a small coo under her breath, as Sabella paused before smirking, as did Winnie and Phantasma. "Oh ho, glad to know you like my attitude." "Yeah, you hear that, Sibby?" Winnie snickered. "You're nice." "Oh hush, or I'll tell Serby where you're hiding your bone collection." Sabella shot back and the wolfish girl went wide-eyed. "You wouldn't dare." "I might," Winnie huffed, and the other girls just chuckled as Izuku blinked, a new look of confusion settling across his features. "You, something wrong, Izuku?" Sabella asked, hearing him and turning to him to see his face. "If you want to ask something, feel free." "I appreciate it, but why are you sitting with me all of a sudden?" he asked, making the young vampiress chuckle. "If I was condemned to eat alone for all of my school days, well, it would just drive me batty," she declared, leaving the boy to stare at her for a moment as all the other girls groaned loudly, Winnie letting her head hit the table. Izuku, however, suddenly snorted, before his mouth slowly picked up into a smile as small giggles started bubbling up and escaping him, which slowly got louder until he was clutching his stomach as he let out a genuine laugh. It wasn't even that funny, but after the stress of being watched having such a simple bad joke, along with the reactions hit just right, and he visibly cheered up a lot, much to Sabella's silent smug pride. When he finally did manage to get himself under control, slowly starting to blush as he realized what he did, he looked up only to be met with the sight of the 5 girls smiling gently at him. His blush worsened, but before he could say anything or worry about apologizing, he felt a hand pat him on his shoulder, and turned to see Winnie giving him a small but genuine grin. "You have a great laugh, dude, I love it," she told him, and he paused, before smiling shyly. "Thank you," he said before turning to the others, letting them lead on the conversation, fortunately none teasing him for his little laugh sessions, as other girls watched on, confusion turning to awe, maybe even some envy. One girl near the back with a skeletal face narrowed her eyes and gritted her teeth. For Izuku, though, in this moment all he could focus on were these 5 sudden new faces who came to help him when he needed it. A soft, warm feeling settled in his stomach, a feeling telling him he'd be alright as long as he stuck near them. He was right, his feeling was more right than he could ever know, because this was how Izuku Midoriya met his best friends, when what may just have been the best school lunchtime Izuku had experienced in his life so far finally began to wrap up. He couldn't help but smile, and from the feeling of the slight strain on his cheeks, it wasn't a small smile either. He wouldn't say he'd fully engaged them as much as he could yet, but he'd quickly warmed up to the 5 friends. He expected to feel awkward while they talked with each other, but they always kept him in the loop of conversation, and it honestly felt really easy to relax around the 5 of them. Plus, between their fond exasperations over each other's habits, Elsa's blunt dry humor, Phantasma's excitable hyperactivity, and Winnie being what Izuku would delicately describe as a being of mild chaos, if the way she downed a packet of ketchup on its own just to prove a point to Sabella was any indication, there was no shortage of entertainment to be had from their bantering. By the end of lunch, as they were collecting their trays to return to their tables and head back to class, Izuku could honestly say he was genuinely starting to feel a little more comfortable. Still off-kilter for sure from the situation, but he was starting to see positives now. As they walked out, he did notice one thing that caught his attention and made him blink in surprise, as the headmistress herself had appeared in the cafeteria with a soft smile and made her way towards the tall fox girl he'd noticed before. He couldn't help but note with disbelief that even the incredibly tall headmistress wasn't able to reach above the fox girl's waist, as they began talking, whatever was being said making the fox girl blink in surprise before wait, did she look his way? He shook his head, assuming he imagined as he turned back to his new friends. Yeah, they really did feel like they'd be his friends. He turned back to them and continued on the walk back to their classroom where they all sat down. A moment later Miss Aya stepped in with a wide but gentle smile at them all as she sat down at her desk. Alright class, for Modern Studies today we'll be talking about the HPSC's recent decision to open up mutant-specific stores. Remember, there's no wrong opinion to have on recent events, so long as you're respectful of each other, and don't say anything harmful. Would anyone like to start us off with their thoughts? The rest of the school day seemed to fly by, as nothing else of note really happened that was new. Izuku was able to do the rest of his classes without needing to pair up with anyone, which meant he only occasionally ended up interacting with others, which for the moment was mostly contained to his new friends. A part of him was honestly kind of curious about reaching out to the others, but at the same time it felt like throwing a rock at a reinforced glass window. It was probably safe, but why risk it? Especially because he couldn't shake the memories of how some people used to be with him in Aldera. Even if Nishi was already proving to be a much calmer place due to the mere fact no one had confronted him for existing yet, even though they'd arguably have more justified cause to confront him here. It wasn't as if there was a lack of interest from the rest of the class either. They weren't being cruel with their stares or anything, but it was clear they were all struggling not to pay attention to him somewhat, as they were blatantly curious about him. Maybe one of them would reach out on their own. Finally, the last bell of the day rang, and the class all looked up, before starting to pack away their work into their bags and getting ready to leave. Looking up, Izuku noticed the other girls had all gathered up into a group and were beginning to chat happily when Elsa spotted him and walked over with a smile. "Hey, what do you do after school, by the way?" she asked with a curious look as she smiled gently at him, and he met it with a slight shy smile of his own as he slung his yellow backpack onto his back. "Yeah, I just tend to walk straight home. I didn't really have people to hang out with or places I tend to like going, so, short of stopping to watch villain attacks, I just kinda get home as quickly as possible," he explained, and she nodded with a small hum of understanding, crossing her arms and tilting her head slightly. "So, I'm guessing your mom would expect you to come back as soon as possible today?" she asked softly, and he nodded in confirmation, wondering why she was asking. "Well, drat. Makes sense though, but if you want, and she's okay with it, next time me and the other girls tend to hang out for a little while after school ends since the building doesn't close." "It doesn't?" Izuku asked in surprise as he gave her his full attention, standing up properly and noting she seemed to be a good head and a half taller than him. With a small chuckle she nodded in confirmation. "Yeah, the school's a safe space, so it stays open with the teachers supervising. There's even dorms and everything for people who want to stay more long-term," she explained, making Izuku's eyes sparkle slightly at the information that few people actually had on the school. "Whoa! That's really cool." He smiled with genuine enthusiasm at the thought before pausing and blushing as he rubbed his neck. "But you'd really want me to hang out with you after school?" "Of course." It wasn't Elsa who replied, but Winnie, who seemed to materialize from around her, throwing her arm around Izuku's neck with a wide grin. "You're our friend too, now. That means you get to suffer Sibella's puns with the rest of us. Bet they're great." Sibella protested with a small huff as she crossed her arms with a light pout, making the others groan but grin as Phantasma floated over with that high-pitched giggle of hers. "But yeah, you're our friend now, and there's so much we can show you. We even totally have our own super-duper secret hideout," she said proudly and with a slight sense of smugness as she flipped upside down with a bright ear-to-ear grin on her face. "I'll have to show you my favorite grave." "What?" "It makes sense in context." Sibella sighed before giving him a softer smile as she walked beside him. "But that's for another day. I assume you'll need to talk to your mother first?" "Why, yeah. I don't think she even knows exactly what school I've ended up in, so..." He rubbed the back of his neck with a nervous chuckle. "I should probably deal with that sooner rather than later." "Yikes, good luck with that." Winnie snickered as she led them out the room, the group following with eagerness. Izuku didn't even realize she hadn't retracted her arm yet from its place around his neck. "I don't know how my dad would take it if I told him I was the only girl in a litter at another school. Probably threaten to bite them all, actually. I don't think my mom's a biter." Izuku responded unthinkingly, then he paused suddenly as if thinking. "Actually, I take that back. She bit my aunt once, but that was a fear response. Maybe it was just an affection bite," Winnie suggested, making Sibella snort as she came to their side with a slight eye roll. "Not everyone is a werewolf, Winnie." She sighed in fond amusement as Winnie blushed, presumably at forgetting not everyone had canine-like instincts like she must have. "Right. Anyways, in that case, how about I walk you home?" Sibella asked as she turned to Izuku, making the boy sputter in surprise as his eyes widened. Huh? "And no, you don't need to do that if you don't want to," he quickly assured with a light blush dusting his cheeks in surprise, making her give him an amused smile. "It's really no issue. I'd be here for most of the day anyways," the purple-skinned vampire quickly assured him as they came up to the main walkway to the gate, trying to pretend not to notice some of the gaping mouths aimed in his direction. Then with a more teasing smirk she continued. And it's only fair I make sure no one ambushes you with question. Alright, that's a fair point. He conceded as his blush worsened and he nodded, accepting her offer, making her smile. Well, you two have fun then. Phantasma giggled as she floated above the both of them, and patted their heads before swooping down to Winnie's side and pointing to the forest off to the side. We'll be in the usual spot when you get back, Sibella. I'll see you then. The vampire chuckled, waving at her friends who waved back at the two of them peeling off, shouting their own farewells. See you tomorrow, Mito! Winnie called out as they soon reached a path and disappeared, leaving Izuku and Sibella alone, turning to leave out the gate. With a small hum, a comfortable silence descended amongst them. Just as Sibella was about to break it, however, Midoriya! Hang on a moment! A familiar voice called out, and he turned with a blink to see the headmistress approaching him with a smile, and just behind him was the same tall fox girl from before. Before you leave, I wanted to introduce you to someone. Hello? Squeak! The girl said, crouching to be closer to his height, which only semi-worked as she was still taller than Elsa was earlier, and held out a hand to shake. He took it, and shook it back in surprise. I'm Keikyu Akitsu, you probably saw me in class. Why yeah, I did. He nodded with a bashful smile and chuckle, smiling back and trying his best to be polite, wondering where this was going. Izuku Midoriya, which you already knew, but... A shy giggle escaped her before she stood up again and nodded to the headmistress, who turned to him with a polite hum. Yes, well, now that you're introduced, have you heard that there is a dorm system at the school? Why yes, miss. Winnie told me about it earlier? He explained, and a light of recognition seemed to light up in the headmistress's eyes before she grinned slightly, a less formal and more amused grin as she turned to Sibella. I see you and your friends have already gotten your claws on him, Sibella, she said with an amused shake of her head and photut, making the girl chuckle slightly. Of course, headmistress, she retorted with amusement, and a mild note of pride in her voice that Izuku could pick up on. It's only right that I help my new classmates, no matter who they are. A good attitude to have. The headmistress smiled before turning to Izuku again, her smile lessening slightly but not in a way that made it any less happy, just softer. Anyways, the reason I bring it up is Nishi has a room ready for every student if needed. There was one ready for you long before we knew you'd even be coming, as that's just how the school works. Oh. Izuku blinked in surprise, not sure what to say to that. He doubted he'd have any reason to need to use it, but he was surprised he was being told about it at all. I didn't know that. Yes, well, the same rules I told you before apply, but if you ever need a safe place, it will be available to you. The reason I bring it up is Nishi works on a buddy system for official pairings in matters such as this and other official functions. So long as there isn't any hostility between two people, an odd number student is always paired up with the even number above them. Prior to now, Miss Akitsa here didn't have a buddy system as there was an odd number of students at the school, but when you joined that changed, and so as you're in her class, you and Miss Akitsa will be paired up from now on in anything such as assemblies where we asked you to make pair up. Does this all make sense? Why yeah, I think so. It's essentially for organization, right? He asked, and she nodded with a smile. With a shy smile of his own, he turned to QQ. In that case, I'll try to be a good buddy, I guess? QQ blinked, but then a small shy giggle escaped her as she hid her hand behind her mouth. Thank you. I'll try and be a good buddy too. Squeak. And maybe we can talk a bit more tomorrow? Or if you decide to come to our dorm, then we can work it out then, since we'll be roommates. Huh? Izuku blinked and Sibella let out a slightly undignified snort, turning away and covering her mouth with a snicker at the surprised look on his face, while Dimitrescu gave her a warning look, yet amusement danced in her own eyes. As buddies, you share a dorm space, Dimitrescu explained as she turned back to him. It's essentially like you both share a small common space with separated bedrooms, so there's nothing to worry about. Yeah. That makes a bit more sense, yeah. He nodded with a light blush and chuckled before humming. I'll keep that in mind, though I don't live too far away, so I should be fine? Of course. It's not as though everyone uses it anyways. The tall pale vampiress chuckled as she stood up to her full height and looked behind her, seeming to check something before turning back with a gentle smile. Just let Miss Yutuki know if you are staying in the dorms so we can sign you in. That way we can make sure you're safe, and remember, if you need anything and you don't know who to go to, my door is always open. Alright, thank you, headmistress. He bowed slightly in thanks and she smiled softly, pleased with the interaction before nodding at the other two girls. Alright, well, have a good day, you three. She bid them farewell, before turning and walking off back towards the school with a slight sway in her step. Before a moment later a squeak from QQ brought the two smaller students' attention to her. Well, I should get back to my room too. Squeak! I promised my dad I'd call him after school today. She excused herself as she began making her way off to one side of the school, seeming to decide to walk around it. Bye. Goodbye, Q. Sabella called out happily while Izuku waved quietly, before the two hummed and turned to walk back out the main gate. When they got to the gate though, Sabella stopped for a moment, and Izuku turned to her with curiosity as Yutuki, the receptionist, seemed to reach for something under the desk before pulling it out and giving it to the girl, who smiled. Much appreciated. Have a good time, and don't lose your parcel again. The receptionist called with an amused note in her voice as Sabella came back to Izuku's side as they began walking again. After a moment he found his voice. You have a parasol? He asked curiously, looking at the pitch-black device that was keeping his new friend completely within a shade, as if it was molded to specifically cover her entirely. An amused giggle sounded from her as she nodded. Indeed. It's but a necessity, after all, Sabella said, grinning as Izuku smiled at her pun instead of groaning. He did raise a curious brow though at her choice of words, prompting her to continue explaining. I am a vampire after all, and outside the quirks that are keeping Nishi in a nice dark cloudy setting, it's quite a sunny day to do. Izuku's eyes went wide and he gasped before paling in worry as he turned to her fully. Wait, you're not going to die if you drop it, are you? You didn't need to come with if it's that dangerous. To his concern, he was met with a few soft blinks of surprise before Sabella began chuckling with a twinkle of delight and amusement in her eyes. Thank you for your concern, but it's not quite that severe, thankfully. No, it's just that if I am exposed to the sun, it's a bit like a normal person running around without stopping for a break. It's fine at first, but the longer it lasts, the more dangerous it becomes for my body. So the parasol just makes it easier for me to safely get around. I won't instantly die if I drop it though. Oh. He blushed, before his eyes widened with eagerness as he considered what that meant for her quirk, and before he knew it he was whipping his bag back into his hands, digging through it, and pulling out a familiar notebook. Hero Analysis for the Future number 10, making Sabella blink and raise a brow at the title. That's really interesting, though. So that means you have a similar but not exact same weakness as a vampire then? Does that mean you also have deviations from the usual other weaknesses? Maybe also deviations in powers? What about? He froze as he saw her staring with a quiet, amused smirk and raised brow, making him blush furiously as he began to put his book away. Sorry, I just really like quirks and analyzing them. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable or anything. He quickly apologized, only to be caught off guard when she put a hand on his shoulder with something almost eager in her eyes. Oh, don't apologize, I heavily admire note-taking. My friends even say I'm a little batty for it, since I tend to write 6 or 7 pages of notes, even on subjects I don't like, she assured with a slight grin appearing on her face. So please take as many notes as you like, I'll happily answer your questions. He blinked once before his eyes practically shined and sparkled with excitement, pulling out his notebook to continue asking questions and mentioning ideas, while Sabella happily provided answers and theories of her own. She felt slightly guilty about fibbing to him, but he'd probably think she's weird if he found out she was actually often taking almost double the amount of notes she mentioned, right? Besides, his smile was easily worth it. Incomidaria, a green-haired and slightly bigger woman with a kind demeanor and a penchant for anxiety as bad as her own sons, watched the clock in her apartment with unease, a slight trickle of sweat on her neck. Impatiently, her foot tapped against the floor underneath her chair as she pretended she was anxious about not burning the food she had on, even though really that wasn't the case. The real cause of her anxiety was obvious. She didn't know how Izuku would be doing at his new school. When the report about Aldera had come out, she'd felt her heart stop and a feeling of guilt begin to gnaw on her, as she realized she very likely missed signs of her son being mistreated. And now he was late home. Granted only by a couple of minutes, and there could be any number of differences on his route home, but her mind was not playing nice at the moment. What if it happened again? What if the new school he was now at was even worse? Would she notice this time? She hoped so. She was on the lookout. What if they weren't a better place to be? Or, before her thoughts could spiral too much, a knock at the door made her immediately stand up straight, almost knocking her chair to the floor, as she quickly shoved it back in and walked to the door, opening it and sighing in relief immediately at seeing her son standing with a smile beyond bright. "Welcome back, sweetie." Then she saw a flash of purple in the corner of her eyes and she blinked in surprise, turning to the girl beside him who was grinning at her son and now smiling more innocently at him. "Oh, and hello there, dear. Who are you?" I'm Sibella Kamori, Miss Midoriya, but please just call me Sibella. It's more common at our school to use our first names, especially if we pick them out, for comfort reasons," she explained with a sweet smile. Inko blinked in surprise but nodded in understanding, wondering just what kind of school would have a policy like that. And what did she mean by picking out her name? "It's nice to meet my friend's mother." Inko's eyes widened at that in surprise before a genuinely happy smile took over her face as her heart leaped in excitement and happiness for her son. "It's nice to meet you too, Sibella. I'm Inko Midoriya. Do you want to come in?" Thank you for the offer, but I have some people waiting for me, so I'll have to decline." She refused politely, surprising Inko somewhat with her vocabulary. "I hope you have a good day though, and I promise I'll look after your son while he's with us." Inko blinked in confusion at that, nodding somewhat dumbly without understanding as Sibella bowed politely before surprising Izuku with a light hug that made him blush furiously before she said her goodbyes and walked off, leaving mother and son alone. A moment later, Izuku walked inside and Inko closed the door, turning to him. "Well, she seems nice?" Inko blinked again then frowned slightly as she tilted her head. "But what did she mean she'll look after you?" Izuku paused, clear hesitation on his face as he was considering his answer before sighing and turning to her with a nervous smile. "Turns out the school I got sent to was Nishi Ghoul School." Inko snorted then shook her head in amusement. "Good one, Izuku. Seriously though, what did she actually mean?" "Oh my god, you're serious?" "Why yeah." He nodded as he tried not to giggle at his mother's jaw-dropped look, putting his bag to one side and his shoes away on the shoe rack they had. "I think Aldera tried to sabotage me." Inko felt her nostrils flare and her eyes twitch before she turned to where she knew a notebook was nearby. Note to self, remember to start looking into lawyers if possible. This sentiment only continued to grow as Izuku explained more about how he showed up to school, with a clearly altered profile, and wasn't that a massive red flag on the fact they could even do that? And how Dimitrescu was ignored by everyone as soon as his quirk status came up, if they didn't ignore her outright, which some seemed to do. And then she decided, if no one else would take me, Nishi wouldn't just throw me out but rather make sure I actually have somewhere safe I can go to. I had to agree to some additional rules, but she let me transfer in," he explained, leaving Inko in a stunned state before she went quiet. Finally, after a moment, she joined him on the couch. "And how did the girls of the school take it?" she asked, prompting Izuku to explain how most just seemed surprised and shocked but didn't say anything to it. Inko could admit she did find the idea of an entire class gaping at her son kind of funny in this scenario, and then she found out in fact that at lunch Sibella and her friends approached and actually befriended him. She had been concerned before, but she felt herself soften as she saw the genuine smile on his face as he told her about the girls who came to eat lunch with him. She couldn't actually remember the last time he had smiled so genuinely at something that wasn't to do with heroics, usually All Might. That basically confirmed this was a good thing, as far as Inko was concerned. She still had a duty as a parent though, of course, to make sure the school would be safe for him if possible. "I see. I'll need a little time to process that, but I'm glad you seem to be happy. If it's okay with you, I'll come in tomorrow so I can talk to this headmistress Dimitrescu, alright?" "Alright, I can do that, yeah." Izuku nodded with a smile of his own, before humming as he cocked his head to the side slightly. "You don't mind then?" "Not at all." Inko smiled as she gently patted his head, before a light teasing smirk came onto her face. After all, if you do things right I'll have more grandbabies than I ever knew I wanted. Mom! The boy screeched in horror as his face went nuclear, and she laughed in amusement, patting his shoulder, as she got up to go finish cooking the katsudon she had on for him coming back from his first day at a new school. After a moment of silence, she was surprised when his voice spoke up more shyly, still hiding his red face behind his hands. Mom! The laptop charger is in the closet, right? Yes, I believe so. Inko nodded with a small hum and a raised brow, as she began stirring the pot in front of her. Why? I want to look up how to get to know my friends better, and be a good friend for them? He admitted shyly with clear hesitance in his voice yet also a determination she recognized, one that made her smile softly with pride. That sounds like an amazing idea, sweetie. She told him as she watched him go to the closet, pulling out the charger and grabbing the nearby laptop to dive into research. She just hummed happily as she noticed how he was taking it all in determinedly, as she silently made sure he didn't pick up any bad advice from over his shoulder. So long as Nishi was really as nice as it sounded like it was, her son was going to thrive just fine there, she was confident. She could really relax now as she focused on her cooking, and if she was silently considering what purple-skinned and green-haired grandbabies might look like if she was lucky, well, no one had to know. Thanks for watching this video. You really enjoy this video. Like, subscribe, and comment down below, and turn on that bell notification. Don't forget to support and follow Sunny Solana for writing that awesome fanfic, and also make sure to comment on this story link in the description. See you in the next video. Goodbye.